Now, there has been some big news in the case between ESP guitars and Chondro guitars, and it's taken a lot of people by surprise. A lot of people didn't even know it was happening until ESP posted a press release on their social media just a couple of days ago. And what's strange about it to me is that not a lot of people knew about this. The last time we talked about this was over a year ago when the case all started. In fact, even before there was an official lawsuit. And now we're talking about it now, and I've searched for news articles. I haven't seen anything at the point of me talking about this now, which is on the 14th of September when I'm recording this video. No one's talked about this story, which is weird. There's been a lot of silence about this. So make sure to subscribe if you want to keep up to date with the stories that you might not see anywhere else. The lawsuit that we're talking about has been dismissed through voluntary dismissal, and we're going to expand a little bit more on that later, but because it's been so long since we talked about this, I'm going to give you a quick refresher, although I would recommend watching one of the previous videos that I'll link just because those would be in a lot more detail. But here's the basic story about this lawsuit. Actually, as I'm editing this, I think it would be better off if I just showed you an excerpt off one of those original videos. I think they cover things in a lot more better detail, just to give you a quick refresher on what we're talking about. The most expensive guitars that ESP make are their custom shop models, and only specific dealers are allowed to order these guitars. And they can cost quite a bit of money, so if you're selling a lot of them as a dealer, there's a lot of money to be made. But it's not uncommon for there to be a bit of a wait for these guitars. A year, year and a half, sometimes even 2 years long wait since the order. One such dealer that specialised in these guitars was Chondro Guitars, based in Wisconsin. I hear that it might be pronounced Chondro or Chondro, but I'm dyslexic, I'm just rolling with Chondro. But the pronunciation isn't all that important. What is that in late March of 2023, Chondro alerted all of the brands that it stocked that it had planned to close its shop. They were closing their physical store, but they still wanted to fulfill the orders that they had made, and this does somewhat make sense considering that some of these guitars would have been ordered over a year prior. According to Chondro, all the brands that it stocked agreed to this, including ESP, and Facebook posts from Chondro state somewhat similar from around the time. But then on May 19th, ESP contacted Chondro and alerted them that their dealership agreement was terminated and that their orders were cancelled. ESP said this: "As your storefront is now closed, we have decided to discontinue doing business with Chondro Guitars. Effective immediately, we will no longer be shipping guitars to you, and your existing orders will be cancelled." Suffice to say, the owner of Chondro was less than pleased at this news, and posted this email, along with a few choice words, to the Customer Chondro Facebook group. From there it spread around and ended up in some ESP Guitars Facebook groups too. After this went public and customers seeing that existing orders were being cancelled, and some of those were their orders, there was a little bit of concern there. And perhaps to ease this concern, it would seem that ESP instructed some of its custom shop dealers to post publicly that they could accept the Chondro orders in place. Why this would be a problem for Chondro is that the guitars were effectively sold. They were sold by Chondro, and if their custom shop builds, all the custom shop specking and work with the customer was done by them. So if other dealers start fulfilling those orders, then they essentially did a lot of the work for free. A good and plausible reason for ESP wanting to do this could be that there's a level of after-sales service on these custom shop orders that are only provided through dealers, and if Chondro are closing their storefront, they won't be able to provide that. But also, cutting Chondro out completely from the sales that they made was bound to have negative effects, and that's what we're seeing today. So I covered that story when it happened. There was quite a little bit of online drama with it, but then fast forward to August of 2023, and it changed from drama into a lawsuit. Chondro filed a lawsuit against ESP Guitars, asserting breach of contract in the dealer agreement. And it's basically, like, this is about money, right? If Chondro sold the custom shop guitars, they would get a commission, and now that the custom shop guitars were going through other dealers, even though that Chondro sold them, they wouldn't be getting that commission. So they're losing out on what could be potentially a significant sum of money, because we're talking about, again, guitars that are very, very high priced. So that's the basics of the lawsuit. ESP also countersued Chondro, and there was this fight that went on, and a lot of it is actually sealed because the dealer agreement is confidential and stuff. So can't really look at it, see it, but what I can see is that on September 12th, 2024, just over a year after everything started, ESP released a statement on social media, and this was a bit out of character for ESP because they hadn't really publicly talked about this, at least not on their social media, which has a significant amount of followers. The statement is as follows: Chondro Guitars v ESP Guitars, case dismissed. ESP is pleased with the outcome of this matter and is gratified that the judge in Wisconsin entered a ruling in ESP's favor that paved the way for the voluntary dismissal of what ESP has maintained were meritless accusations all along. Though ESP had formidable arguments in its favor based on contract law principles, ESP did not engage in a debate on social media. A court of law has now fairly and thoroughly evaluated the parties' legal arguments, and ESP scored a solid victory. To be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of that statement, and I'll explain why. And actually, looking at the comments, it doesn't seem that a lot of people are impressed with that either. But let's take a look at the basic case, okay? ESP are based in California, Chondro are based in Wisconsin. Now, the case started in Wisconsin under Wisconsin laws. ESP were petitioning for the case to be transferred to California. There's different laws in both states, so especially pertaining to contract law and the relationship with dealers, Chondro Guitars would kind of benefit more from it being in Wisconsin. Not only is it local, probably cheaper, but it's also, there's contract laws in Wisconsin that would probably favor them more so than contract laws in California. So ESP were petitioning the court to transfer the case to California, and in August of this year, the judge granted that motion. So the case was transferred to California. Now at this point, I'll show you the statement from Randall from Chondro. He posted this in the Chondro Facebook post after ESP did this press release. What they won't tell you, they know they did wrong. They know they had a loser of a case. I had to let the case go because the federal judge in Wisconsin ruled that it needed to be kicked back to Los Angeles, California. I didn't have the money to fight them in California. I fought them as best I could with the money that I had available, but I was already $100,000 in the hole due to this situation. I couldn't risk my family's livelihood and our home to continue to fight. It's unfortunate that in these situations the law doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is, do you have the pockets deep enough to take it all the way? Unfortunately, I didn't. So let's take a look at ESP's statement, and I'm going to point out a few things that I'm not particularly fond of here. ESP, Chondro Guitars versus ESP, case dismissed, in all caps. That visual image makes it seem, I think, to just people who read that the judge saw the evidence and case dismissed, slammed the gavel down. But that's not what happened. This was a voluntary dismissal. The plaintiff decided to drop the case, according to him, because he didn't have enough money to fight it when it was transferred in jurisdictions. Although granted, the laws would have favored him more in Wisconsin as well. But still, if his reasoning is monetarily, this doesn't seem like as big a win as ESP is claiming. A big victory, I think. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm pretty sure it says something like that. So ESP Guitars case dismissed. So ESP is pleased with the outcome of this matter and is gratified that the judge in Wisconsin entered a ruling in ESP's favor that paved the way for the voluntary dismissal. Like, even reading that statement again, it's almost ESP, like you could have worded this a little bit less PR-y and it wouldn't be as impressive. ESP are gratified that the judge ruled to transfer the case to California, which paved the way for the plaintiff allegedly not being able to afford to continue the fight. Doesn't sound all that impressive anymore. So then ESP say that they maintained that it was meritless accusations all along, though ESP has formidable arguments in its favor based on contract law. Okay, that's great and all, but those formidable arguments aren't the ones that won you a case. The case wasn't won, it was dismissed voluntarily. It's still, I wouldn't call this a win. ESP did not engage in the debate on social media. You know, if you're patting yourself on the back for not engaging on social media, probably shouldn't be doing that on social media. I don't know. It just, that line didn't have to be in the press release. It's a bit snarky. A court of law has now... This is actually the sentence that I take the most issue with. A court of law has now fairly and thoroughly evaluated the parties' legal arguments, and ESP scored a solid victory. What is that sentence? Because a court of law has not fairly and thoroughly evaluated the part. Obviously not thoroughly, because the case was going to continue. It was voluntarily dismissed. The plaintiff stopped the fight. This wasn't a ruling by the court. That sentence irks me. A court of law has now fairly and thoroughly evaluated the parties' legal arguments. No, it hasn't. Definitely not thoroughly. The case was going to continue. That sentence irks me. And it should also be said that, ESP are calling it what's the quote? A solid victory. Well, I have here a court document here. It's the agreement of the dismissal, the voluntary dismissal, and it's the plaintiff wishes to voluntarily dismiss its complaint with prejudice and to waive any claims for attorney fees or recoverable costs, whereas defendant, that's ESP, wishes to voluntarily dismiss its counterclaim with prejudice and to waive any claims for attorney fees or recoverable costs. ESP has also agreed to dismiss their counterclaim, which, if Chondro issued a statement similar to ESP, they'd be calling it a solid victory, and you both decided to lay down arms at the same time. I wouldn't call that a win, honestly. But that is the story of this case. It's over now. There's been 3 videos from me, huge ESP guitars drama, ESP lawsuit, and I don't know what this one's called. It's a trilogy that would rival The Godfather. But it's a bit strange, I think, that no one else has talked about this. But that is the story. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you want to, and we'll see you next time. Oh, and like the video as well. Bye-bye.